Okay, thank you for joining us today. It looks like it's top of the hour. Just a couple quick things before we get started. You can submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar using the questions panel, and your certificates should be available tomorrow, possibly later today, by logging into your account. And we have updated the slides, and those are available in the download tab of the GoToWebinar with the updated references. Professor Geddes, if you'd like to get started, go right ahead.
Thank you, Kim. It's wonderful to be here. It means I am awake at this time of the night in Australia. So in Perth, it's 10 p.m. here. And I just want to, before I start, just make a few disclosures before we head into the data. And that's that I hold director and co-directorships of a number of centres. You'll see that we've just we're about to launch the newly founded UWA Centre for Human Lactation Research and Translation. So that's a really exciting venture where we're going to bring a lot of researchers and clinicians and the community together to advance human lactation. I'm co-director of another centre around nutrition and sustainability of the Indian Ocean Rim, and director of the Abreast Group. I'm also lead on the sensor work in an ARC Transformation Training Centre, co-lead on breast milk sampling and research in Generation Victoria, which is the largest global cohort of its kind, and I hold some honorary research positions here in Perth and in Melbourne. And I'm also president of the Trainee Expansion Program, which is directed to early career researchers and students in the International Society for Research in Human Lactation. I also receive funding, of course, from Medela that most of you will know, and some of that funding has gone towards the work that you will see today. But we also have other funding sources and receive research grants from NH and MRC, ARC. We've received some grants from Singapore, Women and Infants Research Foundation, Rotary and Telethon. So let's get into the data and the nitty-gritty of the wearables and whether they are effective, efficient and comfortable. You'll find a lot of the data that I present tonight is published in an online publication here. My team are all listed here. So this will give you much of the data that's in this presentation, but also in this presentation is a comparison to traditional pumping, and that will be published and presented at the Abreast conference on the 10th of November. It's a hybrid conference happening in Perth where we're launching that centre for human lactation research and translation. And that's the website here if you want to have a look at the program and join. And you'll find that that data will be published in proceedings in abstract form after the conference. So, is hands-free in-bra pumping effective or wearables? So, if we look at the wearable breast pump market in the UK, you can see that it's projected to increase dramatically in the next 10 years or so, 7 to 10 years. And that's actually based on a projection that there's been a worldwide surge in women's employment. So in developed countries, women that are in employment increased from 52% to almost 70%. And we've seen similar increases in women's employment in sub-Saharan Africa as well. Also, these estimates are based on the fact that women will have higher disposable income and of course less time to breastfeed while they're at work. So they're projecting that these pumps will become even more popular. So when I've been browsing the internet, because there is really only one other publication on these types of pumps. There are pros and cons listed throughout websites. So the pros here that we've seen is the freedom for women to move while they're pumping, to have something that's wireless so they're not connected to the wall, if you like, or to a large pump. They're discreet, they're relatively quiet and relatively easy to clean. There seems to be no need for a special bra, and it's really smart tech as well that enables women to track their actual pumping and volumes. In terms of cons, there have been a number listed that are somewhat not backed up by evidence. So in particular, the one we're concerned about is the fact that people are saying that some of these pumps may have less output. In other words, mothers may not be able to pump as much milk, and therefore they're better in a short term. And that's been alluded to be due to the suction strength of the pumps, which we'll discuss in a moment. To be careful of leakage as you take the wearable out of the bra. There is some talk that comfort may not be as good, and we can discuss that as well, reasons for that. We'd have to charge some of these pumps. Prices are sometimes more expensive. And then interestingly, somebody wrote on their website that it was perhaps not great that you weren't being in the moment with your baby, but you will see that some of our mothers were busily looking after their babies whilst they were pumping for us. So if we look at the major issue that's been brought up on the internet around suction or vacuum, you can see that this vacuum trace here is negative pressure, so it's going downwards here, and this is what the baby does. It creates this baseline pressure here, and then it moves its tongue to cycle and draw a vacuum as the milk comes out of the breast, and then release it as the baby swallows. So we get the cyclic vacuum of varying peak pressures. And these sit between, at around about an average of minus 60 millimetres of mercury for the baseline, and around minus 150 millimetres for the peak pressure. But you can see that's quite variable, so that's averaged over the whole feed. We know that vacuum is really important for the baby to remove milk. And of course, we've also shown with pump vacuums that maximum comfortable vacuum is much more effective and efficient at removing milk. So most of the pumps in the past have really drawn a pressure of about minus 250 millimetres mercury, or just over that. And there's some internet websites that have suggested that there are a range of vacuum strengths that may or may not have been measured, but are likely to have been measured with a stopper in the shield and the pump turned on. So not the actual vacuum that's applied to the breast. So these will be artificially tested. So you see they range here from maybe maxing out at about 220 millimetres of mercury, and there's some suggestion that a pump or two may get all the way up or down to 325 millimetres of mercury, which is very, very strong. If we look at the actual vacuum curves, you can see it's not just the curve and the strength, but the cycle rate that we need to take into account as well. So here we have a cycle rate of what used to be the classic pattern of around about 45 cycles per minute, and we have this more curved sine-like shape. And here we have the symphony curve, which has the comfort area here, and we have a cycle rate of around about 54 to 78 cycles per minute, which is where the baby generally operates as well. And then we have this 20 cycles per minute that is a much slower cycle rate, right? And if we look at the percentage of mothers that liked these cycle rates, you can see that most of them liked this 54 to 78 cycles per minute, and only some of them liked the 20 cycles per minute, and the other half, sorry, this half liked that cycle rate and the other half didn't. So these mothers were polarized. Now, if we draw a really strong vacuum, you have to have a low cycle rate. So you have to get down to around about 20 cycles per minute, or maybe even less, in order to do that. So that may be why some of the mothers are feeling uncomfortable or sore if they're using very, very high vacuums at low cycle rates. What we've found in our studies previously is that mothers choose on average around about 198 millimeters of mercury, or shall we say minus 200 millimeters of mercury, but we have a wide range of tolerances when it comes to maximum comfortable vacuum. So we have about 20% or maybe slightly more sitting around that top range at the strongest vacuum, and then the rest are somewhere in between the lowest vacuum up into the higher ranges here. What's also important about applying a vacuum that's comfortable and still effective is that it affects the dimensions of the nipple and the amount of pressure applied to the nipple. And you can see these infrared images here. This A image here, you can see there that the scale on the side indicates the temperature of the nipple, where we've measured it here. And you can see that if it's red, it's very, very hot, up around 36.6 degrees centigrade. And if it's yellow, we're down about 32. If we're in the blue region, we're at 26 degrees or so, 26.3 degrees. So at baseline, the nipple's sitting at around 31.5 degrees centigrade, and just before pumping, it's the same temperature. So we've got an equilibrium of the nipple temperature. After pumping, this was with the Symphony pump, so this is a study that's published as well, you can see that the nipple's gone red. It's actually warmer, so it's around 34.2 degrees centigrade. And then after pumping, it normalizes back down, so it cools down to closer to what that temperature was at baseline. The importance of this is that what we've found in 2 studies is that as that temperature increases between pre and post pumping, we seem to be able to remove more or higher volumes of milk. So we see temperature as a proxy for edema or vasoconstriction or vascular changes that might be indicative of changes in the nipple that will obstruct flow rather than facilitate it. So this is what we like to see, is minimal changes in the temperature of the nipple. So what do we know about wearables so far? Well, we know from a paper that was published recently that surveyed physicians that use them at work, that they are quite popular with the physicians. And you can see here of the percentage of responses in response to all of these factors down here, up here on the left. And you can see that all of the light blue is about efficiency. So we see that the physicians are pumping more frequently with the wearables, they're taking shorter breaks, and they believe that this is much more efficient. The other really highly scoring factors were to do with their work. So there were fewer interruptions to their patient care, they were more involved with the staff and the communications and the patient's care, and there was less disruption to the co-workers. So the physicians felt there was less interruption to their colleagues while they pumped. They felt that they were able to pump for longer. So in other words, they pumped for longer, not acutely like for an episode, but for a longer period of time. So it extended their lactation. They also found that because of the efficiency, they were able to leave on time as they had less breaks in the day. And very few thought that this pumping with the wearable improved their milk supply. So that was a pretty good response to the wearable. And where are the physicians pumping with their wearables? This is really quite interesting because it became apparent in our studies that mothers were quite keen to move around. But in the dark blue, you can see that most of the pumping still was done in a private desk or office, or in the desk, you know, the workspace, or in the lactational call room. And we've got some other here. But you do see almost 25% and 15% actually using it while they're seeing patients in the clinic or ED, or even doing rounds in the hospital, which is kind of cool. And then very few, but some would use it while they're operating or in the operating room. But that was not whilst they were performing surgery, but perhaps in administering anaesthesia or being in the room. So which pump did we test? Well, we tested a wearable against traditional pumping. So we had the mothers holding the shield and the bottle as if they would be pumping at home. And the wearable was placed in the bra, as I'll show you, and connected to the pump that the mother put around their wrist or in their pocket or wherever else they thought it would go. So basically, we were looking to measure efficacy, so effectiveness and efficiency, as well as comfort whilst double pumping. And we had the hands-free version of the freestyle pump, so the cups are in the bra, and then it was attached to the freestyle pump, as I said, that the mother held or popped in her pocket or around her neck. And then the traditional freestyle as well, where they sat double pumping. So we did that for one session, and then we did another session where we had the mothers put together the pump, pop it on, and do some positional testing. So they did, if you like, an obstacle course, or they actually did more than we asked them to, which was quite exciting. So we were directing this, but then the mother directed some of it as well. Ease of use was assessed, and also confidence whilst they were mobile, to see how they felt about that. So here are our participants. We're just going to talk about the 22 that are matched for the freestyle traditional and the wearable. So there were around about 33 that had 1 to 2 children, a fairly even split between vaginal and caesarean section births, and they were all mothers of term babies, about 3.6 kilos on average. They also had their milk production measured, so routinely we always do this with the mums. They take these test weigh scales home and they weigh the baby before and after every feed for 24 hours. They take small samples of milk before and after every feed, and then they bring that in and we calculate how much milk the baby's consumed, whether it's expressed milk, breastfed, or formula milk in the case of low supply. And we can also perform calculations to calculate how much milk that mother's actually made, which is sometimes different to how much the baby's taken. We also measure nipple dimensions routinely. We measure the vertical diameter and the horizontal diameter at the base of the nipple, and we measure the length of the nipple. At the time, we had available 21mm and 24mm shields. So roughly 3/4 of the mothers, or 73% of the mothers, were fitted with a 21mm shield, and then almost a third, 27%, with the 24mm shield. You can see that that's reflected here in the histograms, where we have less mothers with larger nipples, but we do have mothers that may have been fitted with a smaller shield had we had one. The important thing, however, about fitting the shield is that what we've discovered is that milk ducts in the nipple expand dramatically. So this is an ultrasound where I'm scanning through the tunnel of a shield here. This is a cross section of the nipple prior to milk ejection. So you can't see the edges of the tunnel on the sides, but you can see most of the nipple, and you can see the back of the tunnel here, right? So all of this is nipple, there's no air in there, and these tiny little black areas here are the milk ducts. It was quite a surprise that at milk ejection, they expanded dramatically. Look at the size of this one. It's 1/2 centimetre in diameter, which is really quite large. And you can see all of the other ducts expanding dramatically as well. So what we found was that we had to have room around the nipple to allow the nipple to expand, to accommodate this large expansion of the ducts. So if we also look at a nipple without vacuum and not in a shield, you'll see similar things, but you'll see that it's quite different in terms of extent of expansion of the nipple ducts. So here, the transducer's across the nipple here. This is the tip of the nipple. The air is reflecting the sound. So here's the tip here. This is the base of the nipple. You can see it changing as we come into the breast here. So here's a very small duct coming through the nipple, another one here, those little stripy parts here. At milk ejection, you can actually see the diameter of the nipple increase, and you can see the milk ducts expanding dramatically inside the breast, but as it goes into the nipple, they expand as well, but not to the degree that we saw in the last slide. Now that's because there is no vacuum elongating the nipple to pave the way to extend these milk ducts to allow them to fill, and the vacuum to assist the milk be removed from the breast. So why do we have to ensure that the fitting is not too tight? Well, that's because we know that elongation of the nipple is critical to milk flow during pumping. And you can see this beautiful 3D diagram made from lots of histological slices that have built up this model of the milk ducts in the nipple. So you can see here at the base of the nipple, we've got all of these ducts coming into the base, and then they come through here and they widen a little bit, and then they narrow to the edge of the nipple. But the nipple is contracted up so that these are concertinaed, and basically it makes it hard for the milk to get out unless we elongate that nipple. Now, the importance of elongating the nipple can't be understated, because Lovenbarsky and myself have also found that there are lower numbers of milk ducts than previously thought. So Lovenbarsky saw 5 to 9 jets. We saw 9 ducts on average that are patent towards the nipple. And Moffat and Going have even seen a lactating breast that have only 4 patent ducts, so 4 lobes that are supplying all of the milk to the baby from the breast. So that's why we fit the shields as we do. Now this is what it looked like. So you can see here's the double pumping set is in the bra. We've got them sitting here nicely. You can see milk down here. The tubing was connected so that it came forward and down to the freestyle pump, which is out of sight here. This is a sagittal view or a lateral view, and you can see nicely here that the nipple is moving into the tunnel here, and it's actually expanding to fill this mother's nipple is expanding quite a bit. So depending on nipple shape and anatomy, that can look quite different. And I must mention too is how much that nipple and breast go into the tunnel can affect how the vacuum is measured, or the levels of vacuum are measured when you're looking at measuring pump vacuum. So the settings that the mothers chose on the traditional and the wearable were very similar. So it was a two-phase pattern applied, of course, and the stimulation phase was around about 7 for both sessions, and then for the expression pattern, it was around about 7 as well. So it just fluctuated either side of that for the traditional and the wearable. So they were essentially very, very similar. Now, what happened afterwards, we measured the nipples immediately afterwards, and you can see that the nipples expanded vertically and horizontally by about 2 millimeters in a radial fashion. Not quite perfectly circular, but no nipple was actually perfectly circular. We also saw, even though we had to remove the shields, a 2 millimeter, roughly 2 millimeter elongation of the nipple that hadn't resolved by the time we measured the nipples straight after pumping. If we look at nipple diameter change, so these changes with respect to the shield that we used, there was no difference between the 21 millimeter shield and the 24 millimeter shield. There was no difference in volume between both and no difference in PAMA. So you can see that the expansions were very similar for both of them. Let's get into effectiveness now. So what we are going to look at is the time to milk ejection, because that does improve efficiency. Look at the volume removed and the percent available milk removed in the breast. So the percent available milk removed is much more accurate an estimate than the volume removed. And the reason for this is that women have different storage capacities of their breasts. So some women can store up to 200 mils of milk, and others may only be able to store 70 mils of milk. We find that out by test weighing the baby on that 24-hour period and collecting these samples. Here is the sample pre-feed and post-feed, and you can see the difference in the cream here. We've centrifuged these samples in these little glass tubes, and you can see there's big change, which suggests that we're emptying the breast quite well. So what we do then is create a individual curve for each mother, because each mother's different, and you can see mother A and B have different curves, and their creams relate to the degree of fullness, right? And so we can have the mother come in, we can look at her first sample and read off her, if we have a 6% cream, read off her curve here that she has a fullness of about 20%. 1 means she's really full and 0 means she's really empty. So we know already that her breasts are not full by the time we start pumping. Then we do some fancy calculations to estimate the actual amount of milk in the breast. And then when we have a final sample, we can calculate the percent of available milk removed. And the importance of that is that we can be very, very wrong if we just look at volume. You can see here if a mother has a storage capacity of 50 mils and we remove 25 mils, we've removed 50% of the milk that's there. But if she has a capacity of 100 mils and we only remove 25 mils, we've removed 25% of the milk in the breast. So in the past, before we were able to do this, we would have assumed that the pump was as effective for this mother as it was for this, and that was not simply not the case. So timed milk ejection, and this was done visually. We can see here that we're under a minute for the wearable, and we're about 1.25 minutes for the traditional. So remember, the baby takes about a minute on average, so we're doing really quite well with the wearable and the traditional. And that was significantly different. So it was significantly longer in our traditional sessions. If we look at milk volume, it was interesting to see that we got almost exact mean volumes. So 69 grams, or mils if you like. So 1 gram is equivalent to a mil for both the wearable and the traditional. And there was no difference in that statistically. With PAMAs, we had slightly higher PAMAs, so percent available milk removed was 80% on average, which is great. And for the traditional, it was 73%, but that wasn't significantly different. Nevertheless, both performed really well. If we look at that post-feed hematocrit, so that large, the highest fat after the feed, you can see that the final creams were very similar at around 14% each. And if we calculate the final degree of fullness, so how much milk is left in the breast, in both cases was around about 8% of the original volume left. So they've done a really good job at emptying the breast. And remember, we're double pumping as well. So we know that Danielle Prime has shown in her studies that double pumping is more effective than single pumping. And that brings us here to some statistical analysis we did comparing the wearable to the Symphony by comparing it to the published data that was already in publication, which just happens to have come from our group because we do this percent available milk calculation and measurement. So you can see with double pumping, the Symphony is in the dark blue, and you can see that the wearable is doing, on average, a good job. It's very similar, so it wasn't significantly different. And if we looked at a single breast being pumped in another study of Jacqueline Kent's, you can see that hands-free, the wearable was doing just as well. And we're also getting, on average, a similar drainage of the breast than the baby has across the 24-hour period. What about nipple temperature change? Remember, I said that we really didn't want to see large differences, particularly in terms of a drop in temperature, because an increase in temperature is associated with greater volumes of milk removed. And we see here that there is a ½ degree difference between the wearable and the traditional, where we have less of a change with the wearable. So we see that it is performing perhaps better in terms of nipple changes. What about compression? You can see that we're now putting pumps and shields in bras, and we're putting them in the mother's own bras as well. So for this study, there was quite some discussion, would we fit the bras? And in the end, we thought, you know what, we're just going to let the mums decide and pop them in the bras themselves. The issues we were concerned about was, of course, compression of the milk ducts. So you can see here we're staring down the barrel of 5, 6, 7 milk ducts here. And if we put relatively light compression on the breast, so enough that you would compress the veins in the back of your hand, you can obliterate these ducts. So you can squash them down, and the concern was that maybe we would reduce flow or just cause some issues with emptying the breast evenly or as best as we could in an even fashion. So here you can see from this mother that you can see these are quite well fitted. You don't see much of a change in the skin contours here. You can see that we used bra extenders. We only use these in 4 mothers. And you can see here that there's not really any concerns of compression here with the breast, because these shields were contoured specifically to fit the breast. However, we did get concerned when some mothers insisted on pumping, and we thought, wow, you know, this is a little bit too much compression here, and you can see it moving in here. The interesting thing was that we didn't find any differences in milk removal, and this is likely due to the shape of the shields, but also this compression is quite a long way back to the areas that I was showing you that are specifically important for milk removal. So it doesn't seem to have affected the effectiveness or the efficiency of milk removal. If we move to comfort, because that really is exceptionally important when mothers are pumping, we have routine measures of initial, halfway through pumping, and the final comfort after the pump has been removed. We also have comfort comparisons to home pumps, and we'll talk about mobility and comfort with that. And also we looked at ease of use. So here we have just looking at the wearable itself. So 1 is the most comfortable and 5 is the least comfortable. So it's 1 to 5 scale. And you can see here that we basically have similar comforts all the way through to a slight increase in final comfort, but this wasn't significant. So we've got means that are sitting around 1.7 here. So in general, the pump is quite comfortable. If we compare it to the traditional, there were no significant differences. However, you can see there's just a slight increase in the mean here from wearable to traditional. And again, here we have similar final comforts. So there was no compromise in comfort with the wearable. The positional testing was fun. We asked the mothers to lean forwards. So we had a doll actually here, and we got her to pretend that she was changing a nappy or tending to her baby. We got her to reach up as far as she could. It's interesting that most of them reached up and then went looking around the room for other things to take off shelves. We thought we might lose a little bit of equipment actually. And then we got her to walk around the room and see how she felt about that. Here we have the leaning forward. As I was saying, here's the baby doll, but this baby's far more interesting than the doll. And you can see the mother is actually pumping, even though you can't see the pump at all here. So they were very keen on actually tending to their baby. You can also see here that the baby, holding the baby close was something the mums wanted to do as well. So that was a real key for us, that they were keen on looking after their babies. The other thing they liked to do was bend over as if they were emptying the dishwasher, at which point we told them that was really their partner's job or their mother's, or maybe even their mother-in-law's job as well. So whilst they were mobile, we had similar comfort levels that you saw with the controlled sessions where they were sitting and we were measuring everything. And they were really quite confident. So they were rating 1 to 2 in general, with their confidence of walking, reaching up and leaning over. In fact, when we got mothers, we got a sofa into the room, we got mothers to lie down, a little reclined, but they got quite carried away and thought that was good fun, having a rest. More importantly, were they satisfied with the actual pump in terms of efficacy, despite what we had measured, and in comparison to what they were used to? So they were very satisfied. You can see there's hardly any changes here. This one's down at 1 most of the time, so the weight of the pump set in the bra was not a problem at all. The rest rated about 1 to 2 as well, and that was in terms of volume, comfort, how it fit, what shape it was. You can see that some of them had their tops over the pump, and importantly, pump vacuum was also rated as satisfactory. They found it easy to connect and place in the bra, so it was quite intuitive. Importantly, they could align the nipple as well, and we got them just simply to remove the pump and pour the milk into the bottle. And despite having young babies and being reasonably sleep deprived, they all did that really quite well without much instruction at all. In terms of the home pump, we see a little bit more variation here, but still, again, we're sitting around 2 to 1.5 on our means here. In terms of comparing to their home pumps, so they felt that it was in this low 1 to 2, means it felt much better. 3 is neutral here, and much less likely up at 5. So they were really rating comfort better or the same, effectiveness. They liked the pump. Did they think the pump was better? There was a little bit more variation there, so there was some neutral ratings there. And their general pumping experience, they liked that, and they were likely to multitask, which is what we saw with the physicians in that publication in Breastfeeding Medicine. So in summary, we would say that our test showed that the wearable compared to the traditional was effective and it was efficient. We didn't lose any of the benefits of pumping in a traditional manner. They really rated it quite well for comfort, in particular compared to the home pump, and they generally liked it better than the home pump. There were comments about, oh, I could go walking, I could pump in the car, I could even go to the supermarket and pump. And the positional data showed really that overall the women liked this idea of a hands-free aspect, and they really did just move around quite easily. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions about the data or procedures, and hand it back to Kim.
Thank you, Professor Geddes, for that presentation. We do have some time for some questions, and we do have some in the chat coming up. Just a reminder, you can submit your questions via the questions panel, and we'll try to get to those. And after the webinar ends, and a separate panel will open for your evaluation. But let's go ahead and jump into the questions that are coming in. The first question is there any risk of milk contamination when it stays up against mom's skin for hours at a time?
So there would be no more risk than with normal pumping. So generally, if we go back and look at some of those pictures, if I can I do that?
You should be able
Yep.
to use your arrow
Yep.
key to go
Here
back.
we are.
There you go.
Okay, beautiful. You can see here that the milk generally sits under here. So it's not, the breast is not in contact with the milk. We didn't see this fill up as much, and really in concern with having it resting here, I don't think there's a huge risk of contamination. We find the greatest risk of contamination with any milk, and particular milk banks, is in the handling of it afterwards. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, so increased temperature of the nipple is associated with lower output?
Actually, it's associated with greater output. So the less change, the better. And if it's positive, we tend to get more milk out. So if you think about it as, if the nipple's cold, it can be either a lack of blood flow, or it's contracted because it's cold, so it's harder to get more milk out. So the warmer, the warmer the nipple, the better, according to the data.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question, and I'll put a few of them together because several people have asked this. First, someone's asking the name of the pump that was used for the testing, and was that the only pump brand that was used during testing? And also, was there a better brand that was tested?
No, so we only tested the freestyle pump in a traditional manner, so just with the kit and holding it, and we tested this one, so this hands-free freestyle. We obviously, there's a lot of pumps on the market, so to test a lot of them would take a long time and multiple sessions with the mums, so we haven't done that.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question is, someone is asking what the sample size was of your testing.
So yeah, that was at the beginning there. That was 22 mothers that had done that, and from memory, I think the one that we've published, where we just looked at protocols and effectiveness of the wearable, was maybe 24, but don't quote me because it's late, so it's around about those numbers, but 22 for the data I've shown you today.
Okay, and that information is in the slides, the handouts, and if someone needed the handouts, you could go to the handouts tab and go to webinar to download those again. So the next.
And just in the new year, if they keep an eye out on the proceedings, it's an online journal as well, free. They'll see the rest of the data published as well.
Perfect, thank you. The next question is just confirming, so the milk volume was not compromised with the wearable?
No, that's correct. Yeah, and it's so 69 mils or 70 is around about an average breastfeed, and yeah, the range, it was not compromised at all, nor was the percent available milk. So sometimes we will see volumes to be similar, but the percent available milk to be better with another, with one of the conditions, but that wasn't the case. That's correct.
Okay, thank you for answering that. A few more questions that are very similar, so I'll add these kind of together. Is there any research regarding starting initially with wearables versus using them after milk supply is already established?
No, I don't know of any data about that. I guess it would depend on which kind of wearable. So this one is connected to the freestyle pump. So the pump is, you know, a robust pump that works well, and we know it doesn't affect milk removal. So we don't have any data on that currently. It would be interesting to know, though.
Okay, thank you for that. One question is asking how many moms are in the study. You already answered that. The second half of the question is, how long was the study conducted, the period of time for it?
Oh, so we had the mothers come within 2 weeks. So they were all, I should have mentioned, they were all exclusively breastfeeding and, well, exclusive breast milk fed babies. So they we always recruit mothers that are pumping so that the baby can get the milk. And so we ensure that if it's not, they do one session 1 week, they come back the next week or the week after, so that we avoid any periods of weaning, for example, that might affect milk production. So we did that quite rapidly, and the whole study probably took about 8 to 12 weeks. So that's kind of all we did for that period of time.
Okay, thank you for answering that. The next question is, I found the temperature readings in the nipples interesting. Would you recommend some kind of warming of the nipples prior to pumping or breastfeeding, or do you feel massaging the breast increases the temperature enough?
That's an interesting question, because the actual act of pumping, the shields, when we did the warm shield study, the shields have to warm up to room temperature, and then when they're put on the breast, they warm up naturally as well. So part of the increase in warmth is just due to the pumping and the shield. So conversely, using a cold shield that's just come out of the fridge, the refrigerator, if it's sitting on top of the bottle for multiple pumping sessions, probably wouldn't be conducive to getting milk flowing very quickly. I guess we have tried to warm up the shield, and what that does is speed things up for the first 5 to 10 minutes, but after 15 minutes, you don't get any more milk. So it could help increase things. The important thing is we think that it's not good to constrict the nipple and cause extravasation and vascular changes and edema that might drop the temperature and also obstruct the milk flow by the swelling, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question is, some moms want to wear these for longer periods of time. Is it safe, and what recommendations are given for the amount of time and the length of each pumping?
So I guess there's 2 things to consider. The pumping must be comfortable, and with any sort of pumping, mothers get used to knowing how long it takes for them to get certain volumes. So in terms of switching the pump off and maybe wearing it for a little bit longer, that might be better than pumping for a long time. For example, long periods of time could easily cause some trauma. So, and the other thing to consider is that the milk is sitting there, which will be fine, but you really do want to potentially at some point get that milk either into the baby or into storage. So I think it's really, you know, a trade-off. I don't think the milk will be harmed, but the concern would be that if the mother's pump for an hour, for example, that would be potentially traumatic.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. And I know it's almost 11, if I'm correct, p.m. there in Australia. So I want to be mindful of your time, Donna, as I'm sure you're exhausted after the long day and presenting for us. So I will go ahead and send any other questions that came in for you to answer tomorrow when you're fresh. And just a reminder to everyone, again, when we close out the webinar, a separate window will open for the evaluation. We would love your feedback. And you can visit medilaeducation.com to read the latest edition of Leading Lactation Insights and to subscribe for that publication that's monthly. And our upcoming webinars are going to be changing slightly on what's on the website currently. So those who are already registered for our upcoming webinars, you will be receiving an email shortly with the updates. And I hope everyone has a great day. And Donna, thank you again for staying up late for us and presenting. And have a good night.
Pleasure. Thanks.